Hello friends, I welcome you all to another edition of Daily News Analysis. So today is 15 November. We are going to take a look at important articles. The first article is about center notifying data protection rules. Important update from the perspective of GS2 particularly. Another important article is about 27th constitutional amendment to Pakistan's constitution. Important aspect from the perspective of GS2 again. The constitutional scheme comparison between say India and other countries' constitution. Important aspect. Another important article from the perspective of say GS2 health is about wild polio strain being found in the Germany's wastewater system. Important update from the perspective of again health related issues and how India has eliminated the polio overall from its population. Important from the perspective of say health. Another important article is India missing TB elimination target of say 2025. So important update again from the perspective of GS2 health. What exactly is this TB elimination program that India embarked upon in 2018 and why particularly we have missed this particular target of say TB elimination is important. In decoding section, very important article is titled Flexible Inflation Targeting, a Good Balance. So the authors here actually defend the current inflation targeting regime. So essentially from the 2026 onwards, we need to look at overall framework of say monetary policy. So the article here bats for say the continued continuation of flexible inflation targeting. So important from the perspective of GS3 economy particularly. So stay tuned for that particular article as well. So the first article that we are going to discuss is about say data protection rules being notified now. So in historic judgment in 2017 in particularly the Puttaswamy case, Supreme Court declared right to privacy as the fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. But right after that, data protection became a very important issue. From that perspective, there was this very important Justice B. N. Sri Krishna committee that was established, that was formed way back in say 2018, so that we can have our own data protection rules. Because at that point of time, EU's data protection GDPR rules particularly are in news all the time. So to certain extent, at that point of time, there was demand after say the declaration of right to privacy as a fundamental right by the Supreme Court to actually have our own rules for data protection. So from the perspective of say our own data protection architecture, in 2018 this B. N. Sri Krishna committee was formed and it submitted its own recommendations for the overall data protection in India. After that, there was iterations of laws when it comes to data protection, and almost 3 iterations were there. But finally in 2023 we passed, the Indian Parliament in particular passed the current version of say DPDP, Digital Data Protection Act at that point of time in 2023 particularly. But now the center has notified the rule. So essentially the implementation of that particular act will take place now. So from the perspective of say overall trajectory of how we have come to this point, this particular aspect of say judgment, then the committee's formation, then the various iteration of say the law itself, and then passing of the final particular DPDB Act in 2023 is important. So now also the problem with the notification is not all the aspects of say rules will be implemented at once. Some aspects will come into force after say 26 or 27 also. So to certain extent, the full implementation of say data protection architecture when it comes to India is not in place yet. But again, it is a very important step. It is a very vital step towards say our own data protection privacy law in action when it comes to Indian population. So our data will become more secure with the implementation of these particular rules now. So very important update from the perspective of GS2 and GS3 as well. You may get a direct question. See, most of the time in recent times we have seen the debate about say DPDP Act's provisions, DPDP Act versus RTI. So this particular aspect is very, very important. Definitely you will get a question when it comes to mains particularly in 2026 about this particular debate about what to prioritize, the secrecy or rather the privacy of the persons or we have to focus on say transparency and overall accountability in the system. So essentially DPDP Act now has, will supersede the RTI to certain extent, and that has created an issue in that regard. We have all seen in detail what sort of provisions are there in the DPDP Act and how it will counter the RTI Act in our earlier episodes of DNA. So very important from the perspective of say governance also. You may get a direct question in this regard, in particularly GS2 or even GS4, the question is possible. So do prepare that particular topic thoroughly. So very important. Again, DPDP Act, very vital as well. As I said, very important aspect of say our own data protection. So see, means nowadays it is said that the data is the new oil. It is the new oil, but most of the time, the data security and the data security architecture in India is something missing. So essentially now that architecture is in place, although as I earlier said, some aspects of this particular architecture will come into force in the upcoming times. So we are going to look at some of the important aspects of the rule now, although we are not going to discuss in too detail the rules themselves, because the rules per se, in detail are not important. You must know what are the highlights of those rules. So remember those highlights only. So no need to go through in detail the rules per se. Okay. So as I said, the most important aspect is some provisions of this particular rules will come into force or will be implemented in 12 to 18 months from now onwards. So for instance, there is a requirement for entities to seek informed consent from the users before proceeding or processing their personal data, using their personal data only for specific legitimate uses. For entities to notify data breaches to users will only be operationalized after 18 months. So this particular important aspect of say rules will be implemented after 18 months, or it will come into force after 18 months. So see, means government has given leeway to the entities, the data fiduciaries particularly, so that they can actually prepare their own architecture for the implementation of the law. So to certain extent, this is good step, I will say, because it will actually prepare those entities for say the effective implementation of the law going forward. So very important aspect of say implementation. See, the data protection board has been notified now. That is also one very important aspect. So under DPDP Act, there is this data protection board of India, DPBI. So DPBI is sort of an adjudicatory body which will ensure the compliance with the law itself. So if the law is violated or law is breached, or any provisions of the law seems like is violated by the data fiduciaries, the affected person can go to this particular adjudicatory body and seek justice in that regard. So this particular body will be created now, because the rules in that regard has been notified. So it is a 4-member board. It is a 4-member board. There will be 4 members. So apart from that, its head office will be in New Delhi. So this much is clear. So it is a 4-member board with the head office in New Delhi. So a very important aspect of say DPDP Act that has been implemented through implementation of this particular provision. So DPBI board will be formed. Data localization norms have been notified as well. So see, there is earlier times, many multinational companies particularly, or even Indian companies also protested some of the aspects of say data localization norms. So now the act or the rules have defined significant data fiduciaries. So who are called significant data fiduciaries? So those who may process or with the condition that such personal data only relate to traffic data cannot be transferred outside India. So significant data fiduciaries will be notified by the central government. Those significant data fiduciaries may process the data, particularly the personal data of Indian citizens, only in India, and they cannot transfer it outside India. So this is essentially data localization norm that has been now notified. So it will create certain issues when it comes to global say MNCs or global companies. So we are going to see whether this particular rule will be fully implemented, although the ministry in its statement said that international data transfers, we recognize the importance of developing mechanisms that support interoperability and facilitate cooperation with India's key trading partners. So, this aspect is important. There may be exemptions. So, in earlier also, the central government has indicated this particular aspect, that there will be, with significant trading partners, the data, the transfer of data will be allowed, or it may be allowed. So, essentially, as I earlier said, who can be significant data fiduciaries? It will be determined by the central government on the basis of volume and sensitivity of personal data they process and the risk they might have on sovereignty and integrity of India, electoral democracy, security, as well as public order. The major tech companies including Meta, Google, Apple, Microsoft and Amazon are expected to be classified as significant data fiduciaries, and it will force them to do some sort of data localization as well. So, we are going to see to what extent they will comply with this particular provision, but data localization related rules have been notified now. So, this much is pretty much clear. But as I said earlier, there is an indication by the central government of, say, transfer of data to international trading partners, significant international trading partners, means. So, essentially that aspect is there. So, we are going to see whether this particular data localization issue will create any sort of bilateral troubles for India going forward as well. Another important aspect is children's data. So, children's data is also being protected under the act. Very important. We have all seen misuse of children's data particularly. See, consent is something very vital when it comes to protection of data, and children not being the consenting adults per se are not in control of their own data. But now what the rules say is tech companies require to establish a system for obtaining verifiable parenting consent. So, tech companies have to take parental consent before processing their children's personal data. So, if any companies or any entity, significant entity want to process children's data, they need to have explicit parental consent before processing the children's data. So, essentially instead of prescribing a government defined mechanism, the rules let companies choose their own method, a decision influenced by social media firms concerned about implementation difficulties. So, social media firms particularly has shown concerns in this particular regard. So, now what the government has notified rule, but it hasn't notified fixed mechanisms that how social media companies will adhere to this particular norm. So, they have given social media companies some sort of room for implementing this particular rule. So, social media companies may decide the mechanism for the implementation of this particular children's safety related rule. According to experts, the rule deliberately avoids specifying techniques and give platforms flexibility. So, that is the case. India does not want to actually have the architecture or very strict architecture where the innovation is curtailed. On the other hand, it will not be the case that the children's data is misused by the social media platforms. So, very important aspect of the rule has been notified as well. Another important aspect of say notification of the rules is penalty for data breach. So, this is also very important aspect. See, you can go to say that particular board, Data Protection Board of India, if the data breach occurs. On the other hand, the DPIB can have or can implement the penalty on the violators as well. For example, the penalty for failing to have adequate safeguards for preventing a data breach could go as high as rupees 250 crore as well. So, the provision has been implemented in this regard, or the rule has been notified in that regard. Under the rules, a data fiduciary, an entity, private or public, that collects and processes users data. So, that is what the data fiduciary, the meaning of the term is that processes the persons or that collects the users data. We also have to implement reasonable security measures. So, security measures have to be there because the cyber security is emerging as very important area of concern in recent times. For example, they have to ensure the security of personal data. For example, there is issues or they need to include encryption or access control, monitoring for authorized access, etc., etc. The rules also mandate the fiduciaries must give data principals a clear, standalone and easy to understand notice before processing their data. So, consent needs to be taken before processing of the data. Very important. Many times what happens is the consent has been taken, or means most of the time the terms of the consent are so difficult to understand. Many times the users doesn't read them and they just tick the box. Now the thing is, they need to have very simple, in very simple language, a clear standalone manner. They have to seek the consent of, say, the user before processing their data. This notice must include an itemized list of the personal data being collected, a clear explanation of the purpose of processing, and an itemized description of the goods, services or uses being enabled by that processing. So, you will own your own data and you will give the permission to the data fiduciary for the use of that particular data. So, essentially this aspect of the rule is very, very important. Remember that. So, these are some of the rules that have been notified. So, very, very important. Remember, the DPIB board has been established, children's data is being secured, and data fiduciary need to secure the data and they need to seek very clear informed consent. So, these are some of the rules that have been notified now. Obviously, there are some criticisms associated with DPDP Act. There is a standard criticism that it exemptions for the government or its agencies while processing citizens' personal data on the grounds of, say, national security, friendly relations with other states and public order. So, definitely, government has the leeway. The government has the leeway of, say, not adhering to the rules, because there are a lot of exemptions for the government agencies themselves. Obviously, there is another important criticism about, say, RTI Act being weakened due to that, and even Niti Aayog has also shown some concerns in that regard. So, very important. Some of the criticisms are very, very vital. So, this is important practice question. Another important practice question is also there. So, just comment your answer in the comment section to both these questions. Very easy questions. If you if you have understood the article overall, you will be able to answer them. So, the second important article that we are going to discuss is about 27th constitutional amendment in Pakistan being in force now. So, essentially this particular amendment is very substantial because it will change the overall architecture of, say, civil military balance in Pakistan. So, with this particular 27th constitutional amendment, essentially the current military chief in Pakistan, Mr. Asim Munir, has consolidated power. Some of the provisions are also very concerning for, say, the overall democratic health of, say, Pakistani democracy. So, from the perspective of, say, GS2 particularly, the constitutional scheme between, say, Pakistan and India, and the comparison is important. See, most of the time Pakistan, being a failed state itself, has also failed to have very consistent constitutional scheme like India. India has its own constitution in place since 1950 with the vision of, say, Mr. B.R. Ambedkar in place, and it is thriving. India is a thriving constitutional democracy. We have all seen of, say, recent Bihar elections. So, it is the celebration of democracy in India, but that is not the case when it comes to Pakistan. See, the current Pakistani constitution is implemented in 1973, and the current constitutional amendment which essentially changes the whole constitutional framework itself is the 27th one. So, we are going to discuss some of the aspects or problematic aspects of this particular 27th constitutional amendment to Pakistani constitution, but from the perspective of, say, basics of, say, GS2, you must know how the constitutional scheme in India and Pakistan differs. So, essentially just to focus on the current news about, say, 27th constitutional amendment in Pakistan, we will look at some of the key changes being done by this particular constitutional amendment. So, as I said, it consolidates the power of, say, Asim Munir, the current military chief. So, how, that is also very important. So, key changes that has been brought in by the 27th constitutional amendment to Pakistan. The first one is the establishment of Chief of Defence Forces Office, which will always be held by the Army Chief, who will effectively also command Pakistan Navy as well as Air Force. So, essentially this particular post has been created by the 27th constitutional amendment, establishment of Chief of Defence Forces Office, CDFO. Chief of Defence Forces Office will be created, and essentially this particular post will be held by Army Chief, and this particular post essentially will also head Navy as well as Air Force as well. Another very problematic aspect or important change that has been brought by the 27th Amendment is the complete legal immunity to 5-star rank officers even after demitting office, a privilege not granted to even President or Prime Minister in Article 248 of the Pakistani Constitution. So essentially, for whatever now the Asim Munir does, he will face no accountability even if he retires. So essentially, this particular aspect of the amendment is very problematic. See, there is a complete legal immunity to 5-star rank officer. Only person who is currently 5-star rank officer is the current military chief in Pakistan, Asim Munir. And earlier, Mr. Ayub Khan, the military chief, earlier also held this 5-star rank. So essentially, Asim Munir will not face any accountability for his actions, even post, say, the even if he retires. Suppose that he will not face any sort of accountability. So very problematic. Even President or even Prime Minister does not have this sort of immunity currently. And this, another important aspect is a supersession of the Supreme Court of Pakistan through a new Federal Constitutional Court. Federal Constitutional Court will be formed, which will supersede the Supreme Court of Pakistan now. So essentially, the constitutional sort of cases in Pakistan will be heard by this particular case. Constitutional, it will be a new high constitutional court which will supersede the current Supreme Court of Pakistan's power in this regard. See, now the current Supreme Court of Pakistan will just become the appellate, the highest appellate court in civil and criminal matters, and all the constitutional issues or constitutional issues of federalism or any other thing will go to this particular federal constitutional court. So it is essentially usurpation of power in one way or the other, because the justice, chief justice and other members of this particular FCC will be newly appointed by the say the nexus of say civil military nexus. So essentially it will be the FCC will become the puppet of Asim Munir itself. So because particularly when it comes to only guardrail when it comes to Pakistani democracy is the Supreme Court. So sometimes justices have given very adverse ruling and they have admonished Pakistan, even Pakistani military sometimes. So to certain extent, this amendment will actually do away with last sort of dissent in Pakistani democracy. So these are very important changes that has been brought by 27th Constitutional Amendment. However, the amendment represents three crucial aspects. What are those three crucial aspects? The logical fulfillment of Asim Munir's quest to make a Pakistan hard state. That's what he, want Pakistan to become a hard state. So essentially, he harshly criticized the earlier Pakistani stances vis-a-vis, say, relations with India or vis-a-vis relations with even Afghanistan. And now what he wants Pakistan to be a hard state, not a soft state. So another important thing to understand, or another crucial aspect, is the maturity of Pakistan's hybrid model of governance, hybrid civil plus military. To a certain extent, now that military aspect has been overtaken. So it is sort of a mature phase of this particular hybrid model of governance and the institutionalization of the military centrality to Pakistan's foreign policy. Pakistan's foreign policy is run by the country's military. We have all seen the images of, say, Pakistani military chief Asim Munir meeting, Donald Trump in the White House, or even, engaging with Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. So essentially, the whole of Pakistan's foreign policy is run by the military now, and it has been institutionalized through these particular changes. First important thing is army consolidates power through these amendments. So as I said earlier, it does consolidate. Army has consolidated power in the Pakistan. Already the Pakistan was, a hybrid democracy earlier. It is not a full democracy. It is a failed state in the end. But where, Pakistan, when it comes to the civil military balance, earlier military chief, Mr. Qamar Bajwa, particularly in 2020, has said that military wants to actually distance itself from, say, civilian matters. But Asim Munir is not, a sort of Bajwa's successor in this regard. He just wants to, reinforce military's dominance in Pakistan. So that's what he has got from the amendment, the current amendment particularly. See, another important aspect of army's consolidation of the power through 27th amendment is the earlier the Pakistani military was at its all-time low when it comes to popularity. Why? Because in 2024 particularly, it toppled, or it actually not toppled, it actually imprisoned Imran Khan. At that point of time, ascendance was there of, say, PTI. But after the crackdown on PTI protests, there was all-time low when it comes to Pakistani military's popularity. But what the Asim Munir leveraged after that is internal struggle and internal as well as external factors to his advantage, and to reinforce military's role after, say, low popularity, after, say, jailing of, say, Imran Khan. So what is the internal aspect which propelled the Pakistani popularity again, Pakistani military's popularity again, is, say, the military, the terrorist threat emanating from, say, Afghanistan. So another external situation that it leveraged is the conflict with India. So in recent times, we have all seen the Pulwama related update, and it also, again regenerated, or say reinforced, the Pakistani military's importance in overall protection of the state. So protection, internal security, external security become a buzzword in Pakistan, and that actually propelled the Pakistani military's popularity further in its population. And again, the hybrid model itself is propelled due to this particular aspect. So the hybrid model, very, very important. As I said, military has established itself as important aspect of not just security architecture, but economic architecture, foreign policy also. So there is this hybrid model which is in existence. For example, we can clearly see it, army's influence on Pakistani economy. For example, Asim Munir, including new economic rules such as participation in the Special Investment Facilitation Council. So Asim Munir became a member of, say, Special Investment Facilitation Council, which takes economic decisions. So you can clearly see the civil-military alliance in work here. So this sort of hybrid model is there, and this has been reinforced by this particular 27th Constitutional Amendment Act with the blanket immunity and all those things. And essentially now, the last vestige of, say, dissent through Supreme Court, the current Supreme Court, is taken away as well by the establishment of new Federal Court of Commission. So to certain extent, military will head foreign policy now. Military will head foreign policy, as we all knew the role being played by the Asim Munir when it comes to Pakistan's foreign policy. And for example, in recent times, there is this rapprochement with US particularly, because even Trump himself has actually favored the Pakistani military chief. So by calling him his favorite field marshal or something like that. So another important aspect is Saudi-Pakistan Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement that we recently saw, sort of, Asian NATO alliance sort of, which allows Saudi Arabia to develop its own defense capabilities in exchange for economic assistance to Pakistan. So this particular alliance between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia is also the result of Asim Munir's, a sort of diplomatic role that he played vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. So also, Asim Munir is involved in major defense manufacturers like China and Turkey, and also he has played important role in Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan as well. So that, overall the Pakistan's foreign policy is run through the military channels. So that is important aspect, and 27th Constitutional Amendment will further cement this particular aspect of, say, policy. So as I earlier said, very important is to know Indian and Pakistani constitutional scheme and its comparison. You can clearly see both the systems are, say, parliamentary systems. India is a Westminster model. parliamentary but executive and military dominance historically strong. So essentially, it is a hybrid model when it comes to Pakistan. So it is not a full parliamentary model, it is a hybrid model. So that is also very, very important. Judiciary related update we have all seen. So you can clearly see the comparison here. So just go through these particular important aspects of constitution of say India and Pakistan. See, Pakistan is an Islamic republic and India is a secular republic. So that is also important aspect of say comparison. So very, very vital to know from the perspective of GS2. So this is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So the third important article that we are going to discuss is about wild polio strain being found in the German wastewater. So important aspect of say GS2 health. In the Germany's wastewater, we have, they have found the wild polio strain for the first time, very first time since 2010. See, most of the time, Germany being advanced when it comes to health and it has already eliminated polio way back, this is a very surprising fact or factor when it comes to Germany's overall health infrastructure or architecture. From where does this particular wild polio strain came into Germany? Means it is said that it is of Afghanistani origin, because this particular strain of wild polio is currently only found in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So these are the two countries still have these wild polio variants, and India on the other hand has already eliminated polio. We all knew India's successful polio vaccination campaign. So that's why the polio that is there in Germany's wastewater may have come through some Afghan or say Afghan immigrant families as well. So it is pretty much possible in this regard, because this particular wild variant of polio is only found in Pakistan and Afghanistan. See, polio, let's look at some of the important aspect here. Polio is an infectious disease that affects mainly children under 5. We all know it. It is a viral sort of disease. There is no cure. It is preventable by vaccine, though, that is true. And case rates globally have reduced by 99% since mass vaccination began in 1988. So almost 99% reduction we have seen in the polio cases because of successful polio campaign. Particularly in 2011 itself, India has eliminated polio from its own populations. So there are two forms of polio, wild polio and vaccine derived or variant polio. Both can cause paralysis and death, but wild polio is rarer and now only endemic to Afghanistan and Pakistan, as I said. So the strain found in German wastewater is linked to strain circulating in Afghanistan. So many countries in the world sample sewage to track spread of polio. Germany's detection is also the sign that the system that is in place in Germany when it comes to vis-a-vis health is working. So there have been no reports of infection in Germany due to this particular strain, and the risk remain low to German population as well. So vaccine derived polio, the more widespread variant, has been detected in otherwise polio free countries such as US and European countries as well. So vaccine variant, particularly polio, is found in US and European countries, but wild polio strain is very rare. So that's why. So let's look at some of the basic aspects related to polio. Poliomyelitis is caused by polio virus. It is a special sort of virus which is highly infectious virus that spreads mainly via the fecal oral route. So that's why contaminated food or water, that's why it is generally found in say wastewater. The strains are generally found in the wastewater. There are 3 serotypes of polio virus, type 1, type 2 and type 3. We can clearly see most common cause of polio paralysis worldwide is WPV1. Then WPV2, which was essentially last detected in 1999 and it has been eliminated completely. WPV3 also declared eradicated globally, last detected in 2012 as well. So vaccine derived polio viruses are also there that can emerge under immunized population. So immunity is formed by say the successful vaccination, and in recent times we have seen the vaccine hesitancy coming back, say post COVID-19 pandemic. So that has also created an issue for say vaccine derived polio viruses to emerge further. So you can see the symptoms here. See, polio infection can be asymptomatic in 70 to 95% of the cases. So that's why most of the time vaccine are the best way to prevent polio. because it is asymptomatic almost in 70 to 90% of the cases. So, when symptoms appear, they vary in severity, and then you cannot do anything. So, that is why polio's control needs to happen through vaccines. So, you can clearly some of the symptoms here. So, paralytic polio, post-polio syndromes are also there as well. So, transmission is also very real. It is a fecal oral transmission. It can also spread via oral route, for example, through saliva, and mainly affects children under 5. See, it is not airborne. So, it is not airborne disease. Remember that polio is not airborne. It is generally fecal oral. So, generally prevention, vaccination is the most important thing. There are oral polio vaccines, there are inactivated polio vaccines as well. Inactivated polio vaccines essentially injected, safer, no risk of vaccine derived polio, but oral polio vaccine, live attenuated vaccines are used in that regard, easy to administer, used in mass campaigns as well. So, but injected polio vaccine, are more safe, say, compared to oral polio vaccine. So, essentially, this particular slide here shows the India and how India has eliminated polio. Particularly, the government of India launched pulse polio immunization program in 1995. Very successful, polio elimination program, polio vaccination program. Nationwide campaigns ensure that millions of children received oral polio vaccine multiple times a year as well. Surveillance and monitoring was done. Community engagement is important aspect, and global support, particularly by WHO and UNICEF, Rotary International for that matter, and even Bill and Melinda Gates foundations have also contributed immensely to the success of this particular campaign as well. So, India reported its last polio case in January 2011, that too in West Bengal. So, essentially it has eliminated in 2014, WHO declared India polio free. This particular aspect is also very important from the perspective of prelims. Remember that. So, this is very important practice question. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Another important article that we are going to discuss is about missed target of eliminating TB by 2025. So, there was very vital national TB elimination program that was launched way back in 2018 by our Prime Minister, and our target is to eliminate TB completely by 2025, and we have missed that particular target. According to, say, global TB report released recently, India recorded around 27 lakh cases and more than 3 lakh deaths, making it one of the top contributors to number of TB cases across the world. So, forget about the elimination of the TB, India is contributing heavily when it comes to whole world's TB burden, like 27 lakh cases and almost 3 lakh deaths happening yearly. So, last year TB was the deadliest infectious killer globally, as it infected 10.7 million people and killed 1.23 million people. So, this is very huge number. So, the findings of the global TB report of 2024 are very crucial, because there was lack of data, because when it comes to 2024, the Union Health Ministry hasn't released any sort of report. So, this particular report that has been released in recent times by WHO has shown very dire picture when it comes to India and TB. India diagnosed the highest ever 26.18 lakh cases in 2024, further closing the gap between the estimated number of cases and one actually diagnosed. So, there is this important gap generally, but essentially the elimination or diagnostic and, say, estimated number are somewhat used to vary, but that gap is being closed now. So, in recent times. So, let us look at some of the basics of the TB, very important. TB is a bacterium, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It is caused by Mycobacterium. So, it is bacterial infection. It primarily affects lungs. We all know pulmonary, but it can also have, say, other extra pulmonary organs involved as well. TB spreads through airborne droplets. So, it is airborne disease, remember that. So, it is not fecal, oral, etc. like polio, it is airborne disease. Pulmonary TB is there, extrapulmonary TB is there. Most important, it is drug resistance TB, that is also emerging as a major threat when it comes to TB control in India. There is multiple drug resistant TB, then there is extensively drug resistant TB. See, multiple drug resistant, what is the standard definition? Resistant to at least isoniazid and rifampicin. Rifampicin, isoniazid, these are all two drug regimens that are used for the treatment of TB particularly. Extensive drug resistant, resistant to multiple first line and second line drugs. Very, very important. So, just remember the technical definitions here, very vital. So, this particular slide here gives you the symptoms of the TB. See, persistent cough of say more than 2 weeks is maybe the symptom of say pulmonary TB. So, remember that. And extrapulmonary TB, you can have spine TB, which will which will involve say back pain and deformity, etc. No need to go through in detail. So, the latent TB is also there. So, no symptoms, only detected by tuberculosis skin test or IgRA blood test. So, that form of TB is also there. Risk factors you can clearly see. Diagnosis is possible through chest X-ray, tuberculin skin test or latent TB, blood test for latent TB as well, and molecular tests like cBNNAT, GeneXpert and TrueNat are also there. Some of the treatments are also very, very important. First line drugs for that matter, 6 to 9 months, isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazine, zinamide, ethambutol. These are first line drugs. And then there are DOTS treatment, very famous DOTS treatment. Drugs resistant TB treatment is also there. Longer, more expensive regimen of second line drugs. Bedaquiline particularly is a very preferred drug treatment for say multiple drug resistant TB in India. And see, prevention is also possible, although BCG vaccination help when it comes to infants, but awareness campaign and apart from that, adequate ventilation and respiratory hygienes are very, very important. As I earlier said, India has national TB elimination program. In 2018, our own Prime Minister said that we will be able to eliminate TB by 2025, and that hasn't been achieved now. The WHO and TB strategy sets a more achievable 2030 target of 80% decline in new cases and 90% decline in TB deaths compared to say 2015, and we are optimistic of at least achieving this particular target set by WHO by 2030. According to Global TB Report of 2025, India achieved only 21% rejection or reduction in new cases and a 28% reduction in deaths say compared to 2015 by 2024. So, we are awfully inadequate when it comes to achieving our target by 2030. So, let us hope we increase this particular rate going forward. This falls short of 2025 milestone of 50% reduction in incidence and 75% reduction in deaths. So, that is also another target that has been missed by India. Despite this, India's progress is ahead of the global average as worldwide TB incidence declined by only 12%. So, we are making progress. It is not like we are not at all doing anything. Essentially, when it comes to world, India, seems like placed at a better position as well. So, diagnosis and treatment coverage. The Global TB report highlights significant improvement in India's TB treatment coverage, which rose to 92% in 2024, up from say 85%. So, treatment, we are almost giving treatments to 92% of the cases. So, essentially, we are moving towards 100% coverage in that regard. So, that is a good step. Union Health Ministry attributed this particular aspect to innovative case finding approaches, rapid adoption of newer technologies and decentralization of services. Large scale community mobilization is also part of the overall program. Treatment coverage has increased from 53% in 2015 to over 92% in 2024 as well. However, gaps remain. Preparation for childhood TB and prevention treatment for household contact and high risk groups are still not widely available as well. BPAL regimen is there when it comes to treatment of say drug resistant TB. B here is bedaquiline, PA means predominant and L is linezolid. So, BPAL regime is there in operational so that India can treat drug resistant form of TB as well. Obviously, you can clearly see multiple drug resistant TB and extensive drug resistant TB, and totally drug resistant TB is also there, like resistant to all first line and second line anti-TB drugs. So, if somebody gets affected by totally drug resistant TB, there are very high chances of say risk associated with mortality. So, very, very important. What sort of innovations that can be there in the program? So, there can be use of say artificial intelligence enabled handheld X-ray devices, for example, or 100-day TB campaign in which this AI related technology has been used and it is successful to certain extent. During these active screening campaigns, over 19 crore vulnerable individuals were screened. So, resulting in the detection of more than 24 lakh TB cases, including 8.61 lakh asymptomatic cases. So, it is a very proactive approach of detecting TB in the population. So, this is very important and innovative program that has been implemented through overall our national TB elimination program as well. Although we have missed the target, but by 2030 at least we are going to achieve that particular target. So let's hope for the best when it comes to TB elimination. So this is very important practice question. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So in decoded section, that is important from the perspective of mains particularly. Important article is flexible inflation targeting, a good balance. See, C. Rangarajan here, the obviously the esteemed writer, has has actually batted for, say, the continuation of flexible inflation targeting that is currently operational. So he actually focuses on three important aspects. What are those three important aspects? Whether to actually change inflation targeting, whether to change inflation targeting from, say, headline to core inflation, or core or accept what can be the acceptable level of inflation, and what exactly can be the changes when it comes to inflation band. So essentially this particular article is very, very important. See, most of the time there is very famous sort of debate about, say, growth versus inflation. At what inflation, at what rate of inflation the growth can be maximum. So through this particular analysis, the author here argues that the 4% inflation target that is there in front of, say, MPC, particularly 4 plus minus 2%, the flexible inflation target is there. 4% is an ideal target for, say, optimum growth when it comes to India. So there is an earlier Chakravarti committee which has also suggested a rise of around 4% intended to reflect the relative price changes needed to attract resources to growth sectors through reasoning was somewhat opaque. So earlier Chakravarti committee has suggested this particular target around 4%, so that we can have the most optimum growth. RBI has long focused on inflation management, becoming more explicit after the dismantling of automatic monetization in 1994, which provided the central bank functional autonomy in this regard. India adopted a flexible inflation target framework in 2016, the monetary policy framework in that regard. Since the introduction of FIT framework, India's inflation has largely remained range bound despite multiple shocks, even like COVID-19 pandemic, marking a significant achievement for a still evolving policy framework overall. So you can clearly see the relationship between inflation and growth in this particular chart here. See, what is very important aspect is the acceptable level of inflation for India is around 4%. So around 4%, the inflation, the growth rate is maximum. You can clearly see here that growth rate is somewhat maximum. So the point here is very, very vital. And after that, as the inflation goes on increasing, the growth rate goes on decreasing as well. So you can clearly see this particular relationship. And what the author suggests is 4% is an optimum sort of growth rate, inflation rate when it comes to maximum growth target for India. So what to target? Essentially, whether to target headline inflation or core inflation. See, most of the time there is a very classic debate of whether RBI should move to the core inflation from the current headline inflation, retail inflation in particular. Headline inflation is, say, tend to change according to the fluctuations in food prices, because it involves the food and fuel, that is very volatile component. And it is argued that RBI's monetary policy framework, which considers headline inflation and the rate that they consider, or in response to changes in the inflation in that regard, may not address the inflation itself in the first place, because most of the time food prices, fuel prices are supply shock issues which may not be adequately addressed by, say, demand side solutions given by the RBI. So particularly there is an example given by in the article of, say, Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman noted in 1963, inflation arises only when an increase in wages or prices coincides with an expansion of the money supply particularly. So he said that increase in wages or prices coincide with expansion of the money supply. If the money supply gets increased, inflation will obviously rise. That is also true. But to a certain extent, without an increase in aggregate liquidity, the general prices level cannot rise. So if there is less money supply, or if there is less liquidity in the market, the prices cannot rise. So the current debate often overlooks the distinction between relative price changes and general price level changes. Food inflation alone affects relative prices, but Indian data shows that it can have pretty much second round effects on core inflation. So essentially, food inflation in a way will have second round effect on core inflation. So ultimately, the core inflation may also change due to the fluctuating prices in food and fuel as well. So monetary policy must account for food inflation. That's what the article bats for. Another important aspect is what can be the acceptable level of inflation. So as I said, 4% is acceptable level according to the graph that we have shown. So below 4% is acceptable as well. While further checks on fiscal or external pressures are needed, there is a limited justification for targeting inflation above 4%. So most of the time that band of say plus minus 2%, if it consistently say if the inflation consistently stays above 4%, it is also problematic because it may affect overall growth rate. So according to the Phillips curve, essentially a trade-off between growth and inflation is possible in a short term, but in a long term, the relationship may not hold. So you can clearly see here what exactly is the Phillips curve. It is an economic concept that describes an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. So at certain point, we have to have that optimum, inflation so that you can have that, maximum output as well, sort of growth as well. So unemployment rate to be low, you need to have unemployment rate to be low, you need to have high inflation according to this particular curve. But there is this one point where you can have the optimum level of say inflation at the same time unemployment rate, at which point the growth can be maximum. So on inflation band particularly, the article argues that the present limit of plus minus 2% has delivered enough flexibility for the monetary authorities to navigate. But what is not subscribed or prescribed is how long the central bank can stay closer to the upper limit. So as I earlier said, 4% is fine. Below that is also fine when it comes to optimum growth levels, inflation particularly. But if the inflation stays above 4%, it is a problem. In fact, staying close to the upper limit will defeat the spirit of the framework. The graph also suggests that beyond 6% inflation, the growth rate declines very sharply. So it also depends on how we navigate the fiscal policy going forward as well. Earlier, what used to happen is there is a monetization of fiscal deficit in 1970s and 80s that is being done through say issuing of ad hoc treasury bills. Ad hoc treasury bills are essentially the treasury bills issued by the central government, and they are essentially brought by the RBI. So that's what directly purchased by the RBI. So that's what essentially monetize the deficit. So monetization of fiscal deficit essentially refers to process by which the government finances its budget deficit by borrowing directly from the central bank. So it is sort of indirect monetary deficit, monetization of fiscal deficit that was done through ad hoc T-bills particularly. That system doesn't work. So now this we have the FRBM Act as well that has been put in place way back in 2003, and we have seen multiple versions of that particular target being missed again and again. And we also have the current target of say achieving the fiscal deficit of say 3% in the upcoming times. So FRBM along with say FIT particularly are the two frameworks will have consequences on each other, thus risking overall macroeconomic stability. So for macroeconomic stability, we have to have the fiscal deficit in check. At the same time, the monetary policy framework, the flexible monetary policy framework is also need to be in place. But the article argues that 4% is fine. The inflation target should not go beyond 6% at any cost, or beyond 6% inflation will reduce or will drag down overall growth. So very, very important aspect of say balance when it comes to growth and inflation. So this is very important practice question. Just comment your answer in the comment section. That's it from my side, and stay tuned for another edition of Daily News Analysis. Thank you.